It is 1 in the morning. And the sun is still up. Not rising, not setting. Just hanging there, low over the water, turning the whole sea the color of melted gold. There are people on the beach below. A child throwing stones into the surf. A couple passing a thermos back and forth. And none of them find it strange. For them, this is just the light. The easy half of the year. Here is the part they will not tell you. The same town glowing under this sun right now will spend 6 weeks of winter never seeing it at all. No sunrise. No sunset. Just a long blue dark, broken only by snow, and by the green fire of the sky. This is Norway. And it does not have weather the way you think a country has weather. It has light. And it has the absence of light. And almost everything here where people live, what they eat, when they celebrate, why they keep coming home is built around which one you happen to be standing in. You have seen the photographs. The fjords. The little red houses on the water. The northern lights folded across the sky like a curtain someone is shaking out. None of it prepares you for what it feels like to actually be here, because the postcard version of Norway is flat, the real one moves. So we are going to do something simple. We are going to travel north. Up the longest, most broken coastline on Earth, a shoreline so tangled with fjords and islands that if you pulled it straight, it would wrap around the entire planet more than twice. And as we climb, the light will change. It will get stranger. More beautiful. Harder to believe. We are going to find the town that throws a party with pastries shaped like the sun on the day the darkness finally breaks. We are going to stand on islands at the very top of the world, where polar bears outnumber people, and where humanity has hidden the backup of nearly everything it eats inside a frozen mountain. And we are going to find out how a country this empty, this cold, this far from everything, became one of the richest places that has ever existed and then decided to hand most of that money to people who have not even been born yet. Stay with me, the light is only getting started. Start in the south. Start in the city. Oslo sits at the very end of a long arm of the sea, in the place where the water finally runs out of country to cut through. And the first thing that catches you is not the architecture. It is how fast the city stops. You can be standing on the waterfront in the morning, the white opera house rising straight out of the harbor like a slab of ice you could walk up, ferries sliding out toward the islands. The smell of salt and roasted coffee and cold air coming off the water. And within 20 minutes, on a train that costs about the same as that coffee, you can be standing in deep forest. Real forest. The kind with no city sound left in it at all. Pine. Wet earth. A silence that feels older than the city behind you. Almost no capital on earth lets you trade one for the other this fast. And it tells you something about how this country thinks. The forest is not a park you visit on the weekend. By law, you are allowed to walk almost anywhere in it, camp almost anywhere in it, pick the berries, follow the trails, sleep under the trees even on land you do not own. They call it the right to roam. The idea that the outdoors belongs to everyone, and to no one. Hold on to that. It comes back later, in a much stranger form. Subscribe to Unseen Countries. Because that gold light from the very beginning, the sea on fire at 1 in the morning, we are heading straight for the place where it lives. And it is a long way north of here. Now leave the city behind. Go west, into the rock. This is where Norway stops being a country and becomes a piece of sculpture. The fjords were carved by glaciers, slow rivers of ice grinding down through the mountains over hundreds of thousands of years, gouging the land so deep that when the ice finally melted, the sea came pouring in to fill the wound. That is the whole story in one sentence. But the sentence does nothing. You have to be down inside one to understand. Picture a wall of black rock rising straight out of dark green water, so high you have to tip your head all the way back to find the top, and even then the top disappears into cloud. Now picture a waterfall coming down that wall, not a small one, a ribbon of white falling for so long it turns to mist before it reaches the bottom. Now picture your boat, tiny on that water, and the sound, which is almost nothing, a drip, a bird, the slap of your own wake against the cliff. The sheer scale of it does something to your body. You go quiet without deciding to. The longest of them, the Sognefjord, reaches more than 200 kilometers into the country, branching as it goes like the roots of a tree. And along its edges, wherever a glacier happened to leave a flat shelf of land between the mountain and the sea, you find them. The villages. A handful of houses. A church. An orchard somehow growing apples this far north, because the deep water holds the summer warmth like a stone holds heat. For most of history, the only way in or out was by boat. The mountains behind were the wall. The water was the road. And it still is, small ferries threading between settlements that have no other connection to the world, the way they have done for 1,000 years. People did not conquer this landscape. They tucked themselves into it. And if standing under those cliffs made you want to be right there, the water falling from somewhere you cannot even see the start of, do one small thing. Tap the like. It is honestly the only signal I get that tells me to keep chasing places that feel like this. 20 kilometers on, the water gives way to something no one expects from a place this severe. A train. The Flåm Railway is one of the steepest stretches of regular track anywhere in the world. It was built to drag isolated fjord villages up out of their valleys and connect them to the rest of the country, and the climb it makes is almost absurd. In under an hour, it hauls you from the edge of the sea up into the high mountains, past forests, past farms clinging to slopes, past a waterfall so loud the whole carriage stops talking when the train pauses beside it. Spray hits the windows. The light goes silver. And for a moment the entire mountain seems to be made of falling water. That is the gentle way up. There is a harder one. Somewhere not far from here, a slab of rock juts out over a valley like a tongue stuck out at the sky, Trolltunga. The troll's tongue. To stand on it, you walk 27 kilometers, there and back 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours across plateaus and alpine lakes and bare stone left polished by the ice. And at the end you step out onto a ledge of rock with nothing beneath it but air, and a valley dropping away, so far that the lake at the bottom looks like a coin. People go quiet there too. Not from the view, from the feeling in their legs of how small the ledge is, and how large everything else. That is the Norway of the brochures, vertical, dramatic. The Norway you came to see, but it is not where most Norwegians live. To find that one, you have to turn inland, away from the cliffs, and slow all the way down. Because beyond the famous fjords lies a quieter heart. Wide valleys, slow rivers, pine forest that goes on for hours. And farms, old ones, families on the same fields for generations, the family's history and the valley's history so tangled together you cannot tell where one ends. You will know the farms by their color. A deep, dark red, the same red on barn after barn after barn across the whole country. There is a reason for it, and it is wonderfully unromantic. That red paint was once the cheapest you could make, mixed from a byproduct of the copper mines, mixed with linseed oil and flour so everyone used it, and the look stuck. And now it is the color of the entire countryside. Beauty that started as thrift. The growing season up here is short, brutally short. So Norwegians became masters of keeping food alive through the dark, drying it, smoking it, salting it, fermenting it, pickling it, techniques that were survival, and that are now, somehow, cuisine. There is a brown cheese here, brunnest, made by boiling the whey until the sugars caramelize, that comes out the color of fudge and tastes like sweet caramel that someone turned into a cheese. You shave it in thin curls onto warm bread in the morning. It tastes like the inside of a cold country trying to be sweet to itself. And in summer, the old rhythm still turns. Cattle walk up to high mountain pastures, the way they have for centuries, and a few families still go with them, making butter and cheese in small huts between the alpine meadows and the long view down the valley. A slower Norway. One shaped not by cliffs and oceans but by patience. Which makes what happened in 1969 almost impossible to imagine. Because under the cold gray water of the North Sea, off this same patient, thrifty, fishing and farming country, they found oil. An enormous amount of it. And overnight, one of the quietest economies in Europe was sitting on top of a fortune. Here is where almost every other country in history makes the same choice. The money arrives, and the money gets spent. Roads, salaries, glittering projects, and a generation later the oil runs thinner and the party ends and the hangover begins. Norway did something so unusual it is still studied around the world. It decided, more or less from the start, not to spend the money. It built a fund. It poured the oil revenue into it. And then it sent that fund out into the world to buy a small piece of almost everything. Today that fund is the largest of its kind on the planet. It is worth more than $2 trillion. It owns stakes in more than 7,000 companies across roughly 60 countries, which means it holds, on average, somewhere close to 1.5% of every publicly traded company on Earth. Pause on that. A nation smaller in population than many single cities quietly owns a sliver of nearly every big company you have ever heard of. The fund is worth the equivalent of almost $400,000 for every single Norwegian, every man, woman, and newborn child, and it pays for roughly a quarter of the entire national budget. But the number is not the point. This is the point. They built the whole thing on a rule. Spend the gains. Never touch the original wealth. Because the oil belongs not only to the Norwegians alive today, but to the ones who will be alive in 100 years. It is the same instinct as the right to roam, scaled up to the size of an economy. The land belongs to everyone. So does the fortune under it, even the people who do not exist yet. A country that struck it rich, and decided the money was mostly for strangers in the future. Now we go back to the coast. And we cross the line. Far to the north, past the point on the map where the Arctic Circle cuts across the country, a chain of islands rises straight out of the sea like the spine of some animal that drowned and turned to stone. The Lofoten Islands. Jagged peaks, green at the base, going to bare rock and snow at the top, dropping into water so clear and so impossibly turquoise it looks like it was lifted from a tropical postcard and pasted into the wrong climate. And it should be frozen solid. It is well above the Arctic Circle, but a warm ocean current curls up out of the Gulf of Mexico and runs along this coast, and it keeps these islands just mild enough to live on. That single quirk of the sea is the reason there are villages here at all. For more than 1,000 years, life on these islands has revolved around one fish: cod. Every winter the cod come, in their millions, to spawn in the cold water, and every winter the boats go out to meet them, the way they have since the Vikings. Walk through a village in the cold season and you will see the cod everywhere split, salted, and hung in pairs over enormous wooden racks to dry in the wind, thousands of them, swaying, until they harden into something that will keep for years. The smell is sharp and salt and unmistakable. It is the smell of how a place survives 1,000 winters. And then there is the summer, when the sun does not set. For weeks, from late May into July, the sun simply refuses to go down. It dips toward the horizon at midnight, hangs there, glowing, and then climbs back up again without ever touching the sea. The whole island goes gold. People hike at midnight. Children play at 2 in the morning. There is no night to send anyone to bed, so a kind of soft, dazed, joyful madness sets in. Time comes loose. You are not tired, because the sun keeps telling your body it is still day. You stand on a white beach at 1 in the morning, the water glowing, the peaks burning orange behind you, and you understand finally the light from the very beginning of this. This is where it lives. So here is what I actually want to know. Of everywhere we have stood so far: the gold beach under the midnight sun, the silent fjord at dawn, the dark red farm in the green valley, which one would you wake up in tomorrow morning if you could? Tell me below. I read them. But the midnight sun is only half of it. And it is not even the strange half. Keep going north, to the city of Tromsø, and ask what happens when you flip the whole thing over. Because the same tilt of the planet that gives the far north endless summer light takes it all away in winter. In Tromsø, for about 6 weeks, the sun never clears the horizon at all. They call it the dark time. And it is not the black, terrifying dark you might imagine. It is stranger and more beautiful than that. Around midday the sky fills with a deep, electric blue, and the snow holds the last of the light, and for a few hours the whole world looks like it is underwater. Pinks and violets brush the southern sky where the sun is hiding just below the edge. And then it fades, and the long blue dark comes back. And on the clear nights, the sky catches fire. The northern lights are not what the photographs show you. The photographs are too bright, too still. The real thing is paler, faster, alive. Curtains of green light pull across the sky and gather and break apart and pour sideways, moving, folding, as charged particles from the sun crash into the air far above your head. And the part no camera can give you is the silence. It happens without a sound. Something that enormous, moving that fast, directly over you, and there is no noise at all. Just your own breath, freezing in the air, and the cold burning the inside of your nose, and the green light sliding across the snow at your feet. People travel from the other side of the world to stand in that cold and look up. But for the people who live here, the real event is not the lights, it is the return. After weeks without the sun, in the middle of January, it finally comes back. Just the top edge of it, for a few minutes, low over the mountains to the south, the first direct sunlight the city has seen since November. And Tromsø does not treat this as a small thing. They treat it as one of the most important days of the year. People go outside. They stop on the streets and turn their faces south and watch the light touch the rooftops. And they eat. This is the part I love most: small sweet buns made for the occasion, soft and iced and warm from the oven, named for the very thing everyone is celebrating: sun buns. A whole city, after 6 weeks of dark, standing in the cold with pastries shaped like the sun, welcoming the light back like an old friend who almost did not make it home. That is the soul of this entire country in a single morning. Not the fjords. Not the fortune. This. People who live closer to the edge of light than almost anyone on earth, who have learned, over 1,000 winters, not to fight the dark but to throw it a party when it leaves. They do not endure the light. They love it, the way you can only love something you have spent half the year without. And we are still not at the top, because there is one more place. Further north than the cities. Further north than almost anywhere people live at all. A scatter of islands halfway between the mainland and the North Pole, where the dark time is not 6 weeks but 4 months, and the land is glaciers and bare mountain and frozen ground that never thaws. This is Svalbard. And life here comes with rules you will find nowhere else. The main settlement is one of the northernmost permanent towns on the planet, and it is, against all odds, modern schools, a university, research stations, shops, people raising families. But step outside the town and the Arctic is waiting. Polar bears roam this land, and there are more of them on these islands than there are people. Which means you do not simply wander off into the wild here. You go armed, or you do not go. The wilderness is not scenery, it is a neighbor that could kill you. And buried in the side of a frozen mountain, behind a long tunnel driven deep into the permafrost, is one of the strangest and most hopeful things humanity has ever built. The global seed vault. Inside it, kept frozen by the cold of the mountain itself, are hundreds of millions of seeds, backups of the crops the whole world depends on, sent here from gene banks in country after country. Rice. Wheat. Beans. The food of civilization, duplicated and stored at the top of the world, so that if a war or a flood or a disaster wipes a crop out somewhere, the world has a copy, waiting, in the ice, for whoever needs it next. Think about where you have just been. A country that saves its fortune for the unborn. A people who guard the right of everyone to walk the land. A town that celebrates light it spent weeks without. And here, at the very top, a frozen mountain holding a backup of the planet's food for a future no one can see. The same instinct, again and again, all the way up the coast. Take care of the ones who come after you, even if you will never meet them. So why do they stay? Why, in a place where the winters are this long and the dark is this deep and almost everything costs more than it should, why do so many people who leave to study or work somewhere warmer end up coming home? Ask them, and you hear the same words over and over. Space. Quiet. Trust. The kind of trust where children walk to school alone and neighbors lend each other what they need without keeping score. And above all, that connection to the land, to mountains that fall into the sea, to forests that begin at the edge of the city, to a sky that is on fire in summer and underwater in winter. They do not stay because it is easy. They stay because of what the difficulty gives back. And every one of them, eventually, has the same moment. It comes without warning. Watching mist slide down a fjord at dawn. Standing under the green light with the cold in their lungs. Or, on a white beach in summer, at 1 in the morning, with the sun still up over the water and the whole sea turned to gold. In that moment, Norway stops being a place you are visiting. And becomes something you carry. That is the thing the light does, it gets inside you. A country that does not have weather the way other countries do, only light, and the absence of light, and an entire people who built their lives, their food, their fortune, and their faith in the future around the difference between the two. It is 1 in the morning. And somewhere up there, right now, the sun is still up, hanging over the water. Turning the sea to gold. And someone is standing on that beach, not finding it strange at all. So here is the question I will leave you with. We spend our whole lives chasing more daylight, more sun, more summer. But the people who live closest to losing the light entirely seem to love it more than anyone. So what would it take, what would you have to give up to feel about an ordinary morning the way Tromsø feels about the sun coming back? Sit with that one. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I will see you on Unseen Countries.